I'm Alyssa Sherman, 34, and I built a multi-million-dollar logistics company from the ground up, starting with handmade stationery and a Wi-Fi connection. For years, I supported my family's business behind the scenes, fixing their systems, saving their deals, showing up without credit. But when they cut me out completely and laughed at the business I was building, I made a quiet move that changed everything. Ever been dismissed by people you once bent over backward for? You're not alone. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to rise up after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happened next caught everyone off guard. My name is Alyssa Sherman, I'm 29, and if you'd asked anyone in my family growing up who was least likely to run a company, they all would have pointed to me. I was the youngest of three in a family that lived and breathed logistics. Sherman Global wasn't just a business. It was our dinner table conversation, our holiday agenda, our identity. My grandfather founded it with a single truck and a warehouse in the 70s. By the time I was born, the company had expanded across 4 states and become synonymous with reliability. My father, Axel Sherman, ran operations like a military unit. My older brother, Grant, was groomed from birth to take over. My mother, Janice, ran community outreach and made sure every board meeting had the right kind of snacks and the right kind of smiles. And then there was me. I didn't fit. Not in the tailored blazers or the boardroom energy or the endless talk of freight corridors and load balancing. I was the kid who doodled in margins during supply chain briefings, who made posters for career day instead of slideshows, who once spent an entire summer learning calligraphy just because I liked the way ink moved across paper. At first, they found it cute. "She's artistic," my mom would say with a forced laugh, as though that explained away some tragic defect. My dad tolerated it, the way people tolerate background music at a restaurant, pleasant, as long as it doesn't interfere with the main event. The main event, of course, was always Grant. He was sharp, focused, logical. He shadowed my father at client meetings starting at 14. Interned in warehouse operations at 16. By the time he was 22, he had a corner office and direct access to the C-suite. Every family story started and ended with Grant. Grant's first shipment, Grant's first client pitch, Grant's MBA graduation photo framed in 3 different rooms of our house. Meanwhile, I was experimenting with selling stationery and planner templates on Etsy. At 19, I launched my first product line. Just digital downloads, nothing fancy, but I built it myself. Designed every page, set up my storefront, even figured out SEO the hard way. I made $80 my first month, and I was over the moon. Dad barely looked up from his email when I told him. "That's nice," he muttered. "Just don't let it distract you from finding something real." Something real became a running theme. Anytime I mentioned an idea, custom packaging, branding for small shops, digital workflow tools, he'd nod politely and redirect the conversation to more important things. Warehouse expansion in Dallas. A client issue in Columbus. Supply chain forecasting. I kept showing up anyway. When the marketing director at Sherman left unexpectedly, I volunteered to help with the trade show booth design. I created new banners, a refreshed color palette, even reworked their decades-old slogan into something punchier. They used my designs without credit. When their website crashed before a key vendor showcase, I spent 2 nights learning just enough WordPress and CSS to get them back online. At 3 a.m., I emailed Dad a note saying it was fixed. He responded 5 hours later with, "Thanks. Grant will take it from here." That kind of thing happened all the time. The more I gave, the more invisible I became. At family dinners, Grant talked about shipment routing technology like he'd invented it. My parents leaned in, fascinated. I once tried to explain a contract I'd secured with a national planner brand, and my dad interrupted mid-sentence to ask if anyone had heard back from the FedEx rep. Still, I kept offering help. I ran digital audits of their outreach efforts, built pitch decks for my brother, redesigned their onboarding workflow for new employees, and automated half their internal processes through basic SaaS integrations. No salary, no official role, just occasional acknowledgments like, "Alyssa helped with some of this," or "I think Alyssa worked on the visuals." They called it keeping me included. I called it unpaid labor. But I didn't speak up. Not back then. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be invited in, even if it was through the side door. When I asked if I could join one of the strategy calls, Dad said, "Let's not complicate things." When I asked if I could sit in on quarterly planning, Grant said, "It's not your world, Alyssa. Don't put yourself in a position to fail." So I stopped asking. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I grew my business. Slowly. Quietly. I expanded from digital downloads to custom packaging solutions. Launched a newsletter. Built brand kits for small product-based businesses who couldn't afford full agencies. It was messy and scrappy and incredibly rewarding. I had clients in 3 countries by the time I turned 25. I reinvested everything I earned and started building infrastructure, tools, templates, systems. Meanwhile, Sherman was doubling down on legacy logistics. Grant still ran things, but he was stretched. Stubborn. Resistant to change. Their backend systems were outdated. Their website hadn't been updated in 3 years. They refused to consider integrating direct-to-consumer fulfillment services. "We don't do e-commerce," Dad told me once with a dismissive wave. "That's your little side gig." Side gig. That one always stung. Especially when I watched them struggle with exactly the kinds of problems I'd already solved, for clients smaller, nimbler, and far more receptive to innovation than my own family. I thought about saying something. I almost did, a few times. But by then, I understood the rules of the room. At Sherman, hierarchy wasn't just cultural, it was inherited. If you weren't born to lead it, you weren't meant to shape it. Still, I showed up for them. When a storm damaged their regional warehouse in Tennessee, I built a microsite to update clients. When a competitor poached 2 major contracts, I mapped out a retention strategy they ended up implementing without knowing it had come from me. No pay, no title, no acknowledgement. Part of the family, they'd say, like that made it fair. At some point, I stopped waiting for credit and started documenting everything. Not out of spite, just as a habit. Notes. Spreadsheets. Process flows. I kept receipts. Not because I thought I'd need them, but because, somewhere deep down, I knew this couldn't go on forever. There would come a point where I'd have to decide if I was going to keep giving my energy to people who couldn't even say thank you, or use that energy to build something of my own. That point came faster than I expected. And when it did, everything changed. But back then, I was still hoping for a seat at the table. Still showing up, coffee in hand, ready to be useful. Ready to belong. And they still saw me as the girl with the Etsy shop. The one who played business while the men handled the real thing. By 25, I was making more than enough to live comfortably. My e-commerce business had expanded into packaging consulting and back-end fulfillment for boutique product brands. I'd built a lean system that worked without needing to be flashy. My profit margins were solid, my overhead was minimal, and I wasn't answering to anyone but my own standards. But I rarely talked about it. Not with my family. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I'd learned there was no point. They didn't ask about it. They didn't want to understand it. Whenever I tried to explain the logistics backend I developed for smaller brands or the automation tools I was piloting for client inventory management, they'd either nod blankly or change the subject. Dad especially. If I brought up work at family dinners, he'd smirk slightly and say things like, "Still selling stuff online," as if I were running a garage sale from my laptop. Grant, if he said anything at all, would just chuckle and ask, "Let us know when you get a real job." It wasn't even cruel, not overtly. It was condescension masked as humor, delivered with a smile. A harmless jab, they'd probably call it. Except it wasn't harmless when it happened repeatedly. When you realized your accomplishments were treated as punchlines. When the people closest to you refused to believe your success was real simply because it didn't look like theirs. At first, I laughed it off. Then I stopped bringing up work altogether. But they still managed to find ways to make it clear I didn't belong. One night, at a family barbecue, my uncle, who sat on the Sherman board, launched into a rant about those YouTube entrepreneurs who sell products they don't even manufacture and somehow call it a business. I said nothing, just nodded politely while he waved his beer around like punctuation. 2 weeks later, That same uncle forwarded me an email asking if I could help him fix his Shopify. The irony didn't even register for him. Still, I tried. I kept offering help, sharing ideas quietly. I didn't expect credit anymore, but I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd start to see me as useful. That hope lasted until one particular strategy meeting. I wasn't technically invited, but I'd helped Grant prep the slide deck the night before. He was presenting a new client retention model that, unbeknownst to most people in the room, I had built from scratch, based on data I'd pulled and analyzed from their CRM. As I sat in the back row of the conference room, watching him walk through the metrics, I kept waiting for some acknowledgement. A footnote. A single sentence. It never came. He clicked through slide after slide, my formatting, my visuals, even my phrasing, down to the wording of the subject lines in the proposed email campaign, and claimed it as something we've been working on internally. We, in that moment, didn't include me. Later, in the hallway, I mentioned it. I noticed you used the exact framework I sent over, I said quietly. Grant didn't miss a beat. Yeah, it was helpful. I streamlined a few things though. Made it more presentable for the board. There was nothing to say to that. I nodded, walked away, and decided I'd never send him another deck. Around the same time, I started noticing a pattern. Whenever I sent Dad or Grant a resource, an article on automation in freight management, a podcast about warehouse robotics, a breakdown of digital tools that were helping DTC brands cut fulfillment costs by 20%, they'd ignore it. If I followed up, I'd get a vague, "We're looking into it," or worse, "That's not really relevant to how we operate." But weeks later, I'd hear one of my cousins, usually Evan, the self-proclaimed tech-savvy one, pitch the exact same idea to the team. And suddenly it would be brilliant, innovative, worth implementing. It happened more than once. The first time, I thought it was a coincidence. By the fourth time, I stopped being surprised. I just started timestamping everything I sent out. Not because I planned on calling it out. Just so I knew. I started showing up less. I was still technically involved in a few projects, internal process flows, some branding updates, digital cleanup, but I disengaged. I'd learned they didn't want me as a contributor. They wanted me as a silent helper. A utility they could tap into and then tuck away when the real conversation started. The shift became undeniable when my cousin Evan, fresh out of college, with exactly zero experience in operations or strategy, was announced as the new executive director of growth. The family email came out on a Thursday afternoon. A photo of Evan in a new suit, standing in the lobby, shaking hands with Grant. "Please join us in welcoming Evan to the executive team," the email read. "He'll be spearheading digital innovation and exploring new market opportunities." No one told me beforehand. Not my brother. Not my father. Not even my mother, who usually tried to soften these things. I read the announcement along with the rest of the general team. That night, I called Dad. "Just wanted to say congratulations to Evan," I said, keeping my voice even. "Thanks," Dad replied, like it was nothing. "It's time we brought in fresh energy. He's got ideas. I've sent you the same ideas for 3 years." There was a pause. Then he chuckled. "Alyssa, you're not exactly interested in the logistics world. Your business is different. It's supply chain optimization. It's just smaller scale. That's not the same thing." And that was that. They'd drawn a line, and I was on the outside of it. The message was clear. It didn't matter how successful I became on my own. It didn't matter that I had more relevant experience in digital logistics than half the people at Sherman. What mattered was that I hadn't followed the path they recognized. I hadn't earned it the way they understood. My value to them was still theoretical. My mother tried to smooth things over, as she always did. "You know your father's just traditional," she said during a lunch not long after. "He doesn't understand the online space." "He doesn't have to understand it," I replied. "He just has to respect it." She stirred her coffee and changed the subject. That was the last time I brought it up. I focused on scaling my own work. Took on a few bigger contracts. Open talks with a third-party fulfillment center in the Midwest. Invested in better infrastructure. Everything I'd once hoped to bring to Sherman, I started building on my own. They kept dismissing it. I kept building. And I began to realize that trying to prove myself to them was energy I couldn't afford to waste anymore. They'd already decided who I was. They couldn't see past the version of me they'd written off years ago. Which meant one of two things was going to happen. I could keep standing outside the building, knocking. Or I could buy the building. And if they weren't going to give me a seat at the table, I'd build my own. And make sure theirs came with an invoice. The shareholder event had always been treated like a family holiday. Not in the cozy, sentimental sense, but in the way our family did tradition. Formal, scheduled, and a bit performative. Everyone showed up in their press suits, passed hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. The same jokes recycled in every conversation. Growing up, it was the one time a year where even the spouses and cousins were brought in to nod, smile, and absorb the mythos of Sherman Global. I had attended every single one from the time I was old enough to stand still in a pair of flats. I'd watched Grant give his first shareholder report at 17. I once helped Mom redesign the event invitations when their old vendor folded. Even last year, I helped troubleshoot the live stream when their AV team couldn't get the video feed running on time. I wasn't on the guest list, but I showed up to help. That was the dynamic. Invisible labor, invisible presence. So when I didn't get an invitation this time, I didn't notice at first. It wasn't unusual for Dad to forget small logistics like RSVP emails, and I assumed it would show up eventually. Then my Aunt Margot called to confirm what she should wear. Did they switch to business casual? She asked. Grant mentioned something about lightening the tone this year, but the invite was still pretty formal. I was silent for a second too long. You did get yours, right? She asked. I made up something about spam folders and told her I'd check. After we hung up, I dug through my inbox again. Nothing. I checked my mail. Nothing. I waited 2 more days. Still nothing. Finally, I called Dad. Hey, just wondering if I missed the invite for the shareholder event. A pause. Not the kind that signals forgetfulness, but the kind where someone debates how honest to be. We kept it tighter this year, he said finally. Only core contributors. I've presented at that event, Dad. I've built half the decks you've used for those presentations. He let out a breath, the kind that usually preceded a lecture. Alyssa, this is a logistics company, not an Etsy store. I didn't say anything. I'm not trying to be unkind, he added, like that changed the sentence that came before it. But this event is for the leadership team, investors, and actual partners. Not side projects. Side projects. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there, staring at my laptop screen for a full 10 minutes. It wasn't that I didn't expect the dismissal. I'd been training for it for years. But hearing it spoken out loud, with that finality, that condescension, made something internal shift. It wasn't just about the event. It was a declaration. A confirmation of what I'd always suspected. I was never really included. I was tolerated. Entertaining at best. Convenient at most. I was the kid who played at business while the adults handled the real empire. And they wanted to make sure I knew it. That night, I opened the Google Drive folder where I'd stored all the decks I'd built for Sherman. Process audits. Vendor communication flows. Cost-saving suggestions. UX rewrites for their client portal. Over 4 years of work, none of it paid, none of it credited. I moved the entire folder to trash. Then I opened the private Slack channel I used with Grant when he borrowed ideas from me for his executive reports. I archived it without a word. I deleted the workflows I'd set up for their onboarding team. I pulled access to the template library I'd created for their internal documentation. I withdrew from the freelancer network I'd connected them with. Quietly, methodically, I erased my fingerprints from everything. Not to be petty. Not for revenge. For clarity. They wanted a business without me in it. They could have exactly that. I poured myself a glass of wine and started going through my own company's roadmap. Things I'd put off. Things I'd backburnered to make time for their emergencies. I worked until 3 a.m. The next morning, I started taking meetings I had delayed. A wholesale distributor I'd been flirting with for months. A venture partner who'd reached out after reading a case study I posted on LinkedIn. A brand founder who needed fulfillment infrastructure and was ready to scale. For the first time in months, I focused fully on my own operation. I didn't tell anyone in the family what I'd done. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't post about it. I just stopped playing the background character in a company that clearly didn't think I had a place. But word got around faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, Grant texted me. Hey, quick thing. Do you have that customer journey doc from last quarter? Evan wants to use it for a vendor pitch. I read the message twice before responding. Nope. Not available anymore. Why not? We just need the framework. I typed back, if Evan's leading growth, he should build it himself. I didn't hear back. 3 days after that, Dad called. I heard you pulled your tools from the onboarding system. I did. You could have at least let us know. You made it clear I'm not part of the company. He bristled. That's not what I said. No, I replied. You said this is a logistics company, not an Etsy store. I'm quoting. He went quiet. I don't want drama, Alyssa. Neither do I. Another pause. I assume this means you're stepping back? I already have. We ended the call with a brittle civility. A week later, I was looped into a group email from a past client who had referred me to a DTC pet brand looking for a full logistics overhaul. They were backed by a major VC and struggling to scale fulfillment beyond the Midwest. I took the call, asked the right questions, sent a proposal. They signed the next day. That contract alone was worth more than my highest-paying year with freelance clients combined. And they respected me enough to put me in the room, not just ask me to decorate it. I thought that would be enough. That letting go of Sherman would close the door and give me peace. But then something else happened. One of my startup clients, a wellness brand I'd helped from their first batch run to their first warehouse lease, asked me to join their advisory board. It came with equity, a quarterly stipend, and a strategic partner role in their next funding round. That wasn't the surprising part. What caught my attention was who their lead logistics partner had been and who they were now looking to replace. Sherman Global. According to the founder, they'd been slow to respond, dismissive of e-commerce needs, and overpriced. She asked if I had suggestions. I told her I did. That night, I reopened a folder I hadn't touched in months. I started running numbers, benchmarking, analyzing weak points. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. And I had more leverage than I ever realized. They had officially cut me out. And now I had nothing left to lose. Just a clear runway in front of me. And the confidence to use it. After I pulled everything from Sherman's systems, there was this strange stillness. No confrontation, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just silence. Which was probably worse. They didn't call to check in. No one followed up. Not even my mother, who usually sent passive-aggressive texts disguised as concern. It was as if they had quietly deleted me from the roster and moved on. A non-event. I didn't tell many people about what happened. Just one. My business partner, Nadia, and I had been working together for nearly 2 years at that point. We'd met through a small founder Slack channel where she'd posted a question about third-party logistics and I'd responded with a long thread about automation and vendor tiers. She DM'd me. We got coffee. The rest unfolded from there. She knew how much I had been helping my family behind the scenes. I'd mentioned it in passing over the years, shared frameworks, last-minute rescue missions, advisory calls that turned into unpaid strategy sessions. She always thought it was generous. I think she also thought it was unsustainable. So when I told her about the shareholder event and what Dad had said, she didn't look surprised. Just tired on my behalf. Alyssa, she said, you need to stop trying to get invited. Build something they'll regret excluding. The clarity of it was almost embarrassing. Because I knew she was right. I'd spent years hoping they would see me. That they would finally look at what I'd built and say, hey, maybe she knows something we don't. I thought if I just worked hard enough, helped enough, stayed available enough, they'd eventually give me a real seat. Not a folding chair in the hallway. A real seat. But they never did. And that wasn't going to change. So I got to work. The first thing I did was reevaluate the foundation. The consulting work I'd been doing had solid margins, but it wasn't scalable. I was too involved in too many small pieces, which made growth dependent on my availability. That had worked while I was juggling both worlds, my business and their scraps, but if I wanted to build something bigger, I needed a different model. I called Nadia the next morning. Let's formalize the back end, I said. I want real systems. Real infrastructure. I want to be able to onboard 10 clients at once and not flinch. She didn't hesitate. Okay, let's build. Over the next 6 months, we overhauled everything. Our offer, our tech stack, our internal workflows. We brought in 2 new hires, sharp operators who didn't need hand-holding and could spot inefficiencies a mile away. One came from a DTC brand that had scaled from garage to warehouse in under 18 months. The other was a data analyst who had quietly built a fulfillment dashboard so effective that we ended up turning it into a product. We invested in space. Leased a modest facility near Chicago with cross-dock capacity, flexible racking, and 0 unnecessary overhead. No flashy signage, no big press announcement. Just a quiet warehouse with a loading dock and a clean floor. It didn't look like much, but it worked. And the numbers started climbing. Clients stayed longer. Referred faster. Our churn dropped to nearly 0, and revenue grew month after month without a single ad campaign. We didn't post about it. No LinkedIn humble brags. No glossy founder photos. Just results. Nadia used to joke that we were running the most invisible 7-figure operation on the internet. But that was the plan. We weren't trying to impress anyone. We were building something built to last. One night, we were walking out of the warehouse after a long day. The floors had just been cleaned. The lights overhead were low and warm. It didn't feel like a startup. It felt like a business. Something solid. She turned to me and said, "You realize we've quietly outpaced half the fulfillment arms in the Midwest, right?" I did. I also knew we were operating faster, leaner, and smarter than Sherman ever had. But I didn't say that out loud. Not yet. Some nights, I'd still think about the years I'd spent trying to fit into a company that never saw me as more than a helper. How I'd taken calls from my dad while driving to client meetings. How I'd worked late building things for Grant and never even got a thank you email. It wasn't anger anymore. Just distance. Like watching a version of yourself you've grown out of. I started journaling again, not because I had time for it, but because I needed somewhere to sort out the shift. The realization that I was no longer asking for a seat, I was building the table. And it felt steadier, cleaner, less performative. No one was handing me credit, but no one could take it away either. I finally understood what it meant to hold power quietly. It's not about being in the room. It's about being the one who designed the room's foundation, picked the location, signed the lease, and then decided who gets the keys. In August, one of our clients forwarded me an email chain they'd been CC'd on by mistake. It was from someone at Sherman. Evan, of course. He was trying to woo the brand back after they'd switched to us. "Alyssa may have industry insight," he wrote, "but our systems are built for scale." I read it 3 times. Then I archived it. No need to respond. No need to defend myself. By then, we were already onboarding a major wellness brand that had been struggling with fulfillment delays on the West Coast. Within 6 weeks, we reduced their error rate by 83% and shaved 2 days off their average delivery time. They sent us a thank you basket the size of a small car. Meanwhile, I heard Sherman had lost a few contracts to a newer player based in Austin. A friend in the industry called it death by outdated systems. I didn't comment. The point wasn't to gloat. The point was, we were just getting started. When I spoke with Nadia again that week, she was mapping out Q1 projections. "We should talk about acquisition strategy," she said. "We're in a position to start buying capabilities instead of building them." I nodded. "I've been thinking about that too." She glanced up. "What's the play?" I smiled. "Long term? Vertical integration." "Smart." Then she paused. "You ever think about buying out one of the dinosaurs?" I shrugged. "Not all of them. Just the ones who underestimated us." She didn't ask for names. She didn't have to. Because we both knew. The long game had already started. And I wasn't just playing it. I was winning. Quietly. Steadily. On my own terms. 3 years passed, and the distance between me and Sherman grew wider, quieter. There were no major fights, no dramatic estrangements. Just absence. We saw each other occasionally, weddings, holidays, a couple of funerals. Grant would nod politely. My father would ask vague, generic questions about the online thing. My mother made small talk, always with a hint of tension under her tone, like she wasn't sure how to refer to what I did now that it was visibly succeeding. But the truth was, they hadn't kept up. Not really. They knew my company had grown, but they assumed it was still a boutique operation, niche, agile, minor league. They didn't ask questions because they didn't want to hear the answers. I let them think whatever made them most comfortable. In the meantime, I was building something with structure. We incorporated under a new name, split the digital arm from the logistics operations, brought in 2 more partners, one from commercial real estate, one from enterprise B2B sales. The warehouse team expanded. We signed longer-term contracts, moved into multi-region distribution, launched our own inventory software. Nothing loud, just layer after layer of quiet stability. And then, almost on schedule, the cracks started to show at Sherman. It started with a client they lost to a faster competitor. Then a regional expansion that fell flat. Freight costs ballooned. 2 of their biggest contracts lapsed after years of neglect. I heard about it in whispers, industry chatter, old connections reaching out, clients looking for alternatives. They were overleveraged, stuck with aging infrastructure and bloated headcount. No DTC support, no real-time tracking, no strategy beyond what's worked before. Which meant nothing scalable, nothing nimble, nothing built for now. One night over dinner, Nadia mentioned something offhand. There's a logistics firm in Chicago that just listed a large chunk of convertible debt. I kept my face neutral. Which one? She opened her laptop, turned it toward me. Sherman Global Logistics. I didn't speak for a full minute. Then I said, let's look into it. We didn't go in directly, of course. We set up a holding company, quiet, boring, strategically faceless. Through it, we began acquiring bits of Sherman's debt. Not enough to raise flags. Just small pieces. A vendor agreement here. A lien there. One of their lenders had gotten spooked and was offloading obligations at a discount. Another was happy to renegotiate if it meant cash in hand. Piece by piece, we gathered leverage. It took just under a year. By the time we reached 51%, no one in the executive team had put it together. And then, one morning in April, the final set of documents hit my inbox. I reviewed them twice, forwarded them to our legal team, and signed. The notification came through at 9:17 a.m. Acquisition of Sherman Global Logistics complete. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't surprised, but I felt it. The shift. The closure. The full circle weight of it. I didn't post anything. Didn't call anyone. I just closed my laptop and walked to the cafe across the street from our office. It was a quiet place, sunlight filtering through the windows, a few regulars tapping at laptops, someone reading the paper in the corner. I ordered my usual and sat by the window, sipping slowly. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from our legal contact. All signatures received. Your ownership is now official. Let us know when you'd like to inform the board. I looked at the message. Then I stood up, walked out of the cafe, and drove straight to Sherman's headquarters. I hadn't been inside that building in almost 4 years. The lobby hadn't changed. Same stone walls, same blue and silver logo, same receptionist with a carefully polite smile. I asked if my father was in. She looked surprised, but nodded. He's in his office. I can let him know I've got it, I said, already walking past. The halls were quieter than I remembered. I passed 2 new faces in Sherman polos. They nodded at me like I was a vendor. Outside his office, I paused for a second. Then knocked once and opened the door. My father was seated at his desk, glasses perched low on his nose, flipping through printed financials. He looked up. There was a flicker of surprise. Not alarm. Just mild confusion, like he couldn't quite remember why I'd walked away, only that I had. Alyssa, he said, blinking. Still selling stuff online? The words landed the same way they always had, dismissive, automatic. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, opened the email with the acquisition notice, and turned it toward him. He took it. Read the screen once. Then again. His expression didn't change at first. Just a slow narrowing of the eyes. A slight tension in the jaw. What is this? He asked. Exactly what it says. Your You're part of the group that bought us? No. I am the group that bought you. Silence. He set the phone down on his desk. Looked at me for the first time in a very long time. You're serious? I nodded. He leaned back in his chair, trying to process. I watched the reality settle in, the implications, the control shift, the question he was probably afraid to ask out loud. How did I miss this? When he finally spoke, it was slower. Why no? Because we had the infrastructure. Because you didn't. Because your board missed 3 pivots in a row and didn't listen to anyone who wasn't wearing a tie. He didn't argue. I suppose you'll be restructuring. Already started. He looked around his office. The bookshelves. The certificates. The same framed photo of him and Grant shaking hands with a state rep from some Chamber of Commerce event 15 years ago. Then he looked back at me. I underestimated you. I know. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just let it sit there. He picked up the phone on his desk, then set it back down without dialing. Well, he said finally. What happens now? You keep your office. For now. We'll need help transitioning vendor relationships. But you'll report to a different board. And eventually, to someone else entirely. He nodded slowly. And Grant. He'll be offered an exit package. Or a subordinate role. His choice. I waited for resistance. For pride. For the ego to reappear. But none came. Instead, my father just said, I always thought this business would stay in the family. I raised an eyebrow. It did. And then I walked out. They didn't take it well. My father's reaction in his office was only the beginning. At the next board meeting, Grant showed up half an hour early, pacing outside the conference room like he was about to walk into a courtroom. When I walked in, he didn't even say hello. We're going to fight this, he said immediately. No preamble. No courtesy. You can't, I replied, calmly setting my folder down. The acquisition was legal. Clean. Fully executed. You tricked everyone. No, I said, evenly. I gave your board options they were desperate for. They just didn't ask who was offering them. He didn't have a rebuttal. He just stared, jaw tight, trying to find a version of this where he was still in control. There wasn't one. After the meeting, our legal team stayed behind to explain the terms. Grant kept interrupting, asking irrelevant questions, trying to poke holes in documents that had been triple vetted by attorneys who didn't miss details. Eventually, even he realized he was out of moves. 2 days later, he sent a single-line email. I'll take the exit package. Please forward the terms. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't even attempt to call. Which was fine. There wasn't much left to say. My father stayed a little longer. For a few weeks, he tried to operate as if nothing had changed, held his usual Monday check-ins, sent a quarterly summary report to the old board address, CCNG people who no longer had access to the email system. But no one responded. One afternoon, I found him in the warehouse office speaking to one of the floor managers like he still ran the place. I let him finish. Then I pulled him aside. You can't give directives anymore, I said. If there's input you want to share, you can bring it to ops or submit it through the right channels. He looked at me like I'd spoken a different language. This is my company. It was, I said, gently but firmly. Now it's mine. That conversation ended with him walking out. He didn't return the next day. Or the day after. A week later, his assistant emailed HR to schedule his offboarding. I never saw him in that building again. What came next wasn't dramatic, but it was hard. Quietly difficult. We weren't celebrating, we were working. The company I inherited had years of decay under the surface. There were entire departments built on habits, not need. Redundant roles, outdated software, no centralized data system. Paper invoices. Vendor contracts signed in 2003 that hadn't been renegotiated since. The first 90 days were triage. We ran a full audit, systems, people, operations. Some staff left on their own. A few we had to let go. I didn't make a spectacle of it. No emails blasted out. Just clean transitions, proper severance, respectful exits. But the message was clear. This wasn't a family-run fiefdom anymore. It was a business. I replaced the old project management tools with real-time dashboards. Standardized procurement. Reorganized the supply chain calendar around seasonal demand forecasts, not guesswork. We scrapped 2 entire departments, one that had essentially been performing customer service by fax. And slowly, the company began to function again. Not just run, but function. Like something alive. The staff who remained, especially the younger managers, were quick to adapt. Some pulled me aside in the hallway to say things like, "Thank you for making decisions again," or "This place hasn't felt stable in years." The first time one of them called me boss, I almost didn't register it. Not because I wasn't used to being in charge, but because no one at Sherman had ever spoken to me like I belonged in the room, let alone at the top of it. Vendors started calling again. Clients who had walked away quietly asked to revisit contracts. We offered clear SLAs, transparent pricing, and a single point of contact for operations. The industry didn't care who was in charge, only that someone finally was. I never gave a speech. No welcome email from the new owner. I just kept showing up, fixing what was broken, replacing what was outdated, listening to people who'd gone unheard for years. A few people in the old guard tried to resist. One senior exec emailed me a 10-point memo outlining why he believed my changes would weaken the brand. He CC'd 3 others on the leadership team, 2 of whom had already signed off on the exact strategy he was opposing. I replied with a thank you note, accepted his resignation the next morning, and promoted his junior analyst to interim lead. She'd been running the numbers on her own for months anyway. Outside the company, people started to notice. Not just the change in operations, but the culture. Sherman, once known for being stiff, old school, hard to work with, was suddenly responsive. Flexible. Transparent. We didn't chase press. But somehow, a trade magazine caught wind of the turnaround. They called it a quiet revolution inside one of the Midwest's oldest logistics firms. I kept the clipping. Not because I needed the recognition, but because of one sentence near the end. Sometimes a business doesn't need new blood. It needs someone who was there all along, just never given the keys. Around the 6-month mark, I received a handwritten letter at the office. It was from my mother. She didn't say much. Just that she'd heard from one of Dad's friends that the company was in good hands now. She hoped I was doing well. That she was proud in her way. I didn't write back. There was nothing cruel in the silence, just finality. One night, Nadia and I were walking through the warehouse after hours, checking a new racking system we were installing. She stopped near the back wall, looked around, and said, "Do you realize what you've done?" "I'm trying not to think about it too much," I said. "No, seriously. You took the thing they built, stripped out everything broken, and turned it into something functional. On your terms." I shrugged. "I didn't do it to prove anything." She looked at me. "But you did prove it." And she was right. I hadn't done it for revenge. I hadn't done it to watch anyone fall. I'd done it because I could see what Sherman could still be, and because I knew exactly what had been holding it back. And that was never me. It was never the fact that I sold stuff online. It was the fact that I saw the future coming, and they didn't want to hear it from someone like me. Now they didn't have a choice. The company was mine. And I was just getting started. My mother called in April. It had been almost a year since the acquisition, and by then, the transition was steady. The staff had adjusted, the systems were solid, and the company was growing, quietly, efficiently, without headlines or drama. I hadn't heard from either of my parents in months. So when I saw her name on my phone, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But I picked up. She didn't ask for anything. No updates, no favors, no questions about the company. She just said, "I heard everything's going well. I know we didn't always understand what you were building, but I want you to know I'm proud of you." That was it. Simple. Careful. Maybe a little rehearsed. But sincere in her way. I thanked her, and we hung up not long after. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a breakthrough. But it was something. A quiet acknowledgement. I didn't need it, but I appreciated it. A few weeks later, my lawyer sent me a message. "Your father has requested a meeting." No formal agenda. Said it's personal. "You're under no obligation." I read the message twice before replying. "I'll take the meeting. Neutral location. 1 hour." We booked a private conference room downtown. Neutral territory. No company logos, no offices either of us had ever sat in before. Just clean walls, a long table, and a carafe of water no one touched. He arrived on time. That surprised me. I hadn't seen him since the day I showed him the acquisition notice. He looked older. Not in a dramatic, aged by regret way, just more worn down. Softer around the eyes. Less rigid. Like someone who'd been keeping quiet for a long time and finally ran out of reasons not to speak. He sat across from me. Didn't take off his coat. "I didn't see this coming," he said. I didn't reply immediately. "That was the point," I said finally. He nodded slowly. Like he wasn't expecting me to be angry, but wasn't sure how far the door was open either. "I made mistakes," he said. Still, I said nothing. He looked down at the table. Cleared his throat. "You were always independent. I thought that meant you didn't need anything from us. I didn't realize you were trying to contribute." That part stung a little, not because it was untrue, but because it reduced everything I gave to a misunderstanding. I could have argued. Could have listed every spreadsheet, every deck, every late-night rescue mission. But I didn't. Because it didn't matter now. The damage was already done. And we were sitting in the aftermath. "I wasn't asking to be rescued," I said. "I was asking to be respected." He nodded again. That quiet, subtle kind of agreement that's less about accepting blame and more about running out of things to defend. I opened my folder. Pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a contract. Just a one-page outline of a consulting role, legacy strategy, historical advisory, no managerial authority. Flexible schedule. Limited access. Clear terms. "I don't owe you this," I said, placing it in front of him. "But I'm offering it. Not out of guilt. Not out of pity. Because there are things you know that could still be useful. If you want to be part of this company, you can. On my terms." He picked it up. Read it quietly. His mouth tightened a little. Like the part of him that still believed he should be the one offering something was struggling to make peace with the reversal. Then he set it down. "I appreciate it," he said. "But I'm going to decline." I nodded. That was the end of the meeting. He stood. Reached for his coat. Paused like he might say something else. But he didn't. He just left. And I didn't follow. I stayed in the conference room a few minutes longer. Not because I was processing anything profound, but because I needed a minute to come back to myself. To shake off the weight of sitting across from a man who had once been the gatekeeper to a legacy I no longer needed permission to enter. That's what surprised me most. I wasn't angry anymore. Not numb. Not detached. Just done. I'd spent years trying to be taken seriously by someone who saw me as a side note. Now I was running the company he built, better than he had, and still, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want his apology. I just wanted clean ground between us. A place to meet, or not meet, on equal terms. I left the room and went back to the office. A few days later, I got an email from a former Sherman manager. She had worked under my father for nearly a decade, quiet, smart, underutilized. I had promoted her 3 months earlier to run vendor strategy. Her subject line was simple: "Thank you for believing in me." That one I saved. That week, I walked through the new operations floor. The teams were sharper, younger, more agile. Our vendor contracts had been renegotiated. Our internal training portal, built from scratch, was finally complete. Staff turnover was down, client retention was up, and we were 3 months ahead on Q3 targets. It didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like momentum. One afternoon, Nadia and I were reviewing next year's forecast. She looked up from her laptop and said, "Are you good with all this?" I mean, really good with it. I knew what she meant. She wasn't asking about performance. She was asking about peace. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." Because I didn't need validation anymore. Or a seat at their table. Or the illusion of harmony. I had what I needed: autonomy, clarity, and a business that no longer needed to apologize for how it was built. The door with my family wasn't locked. But it also wasn't wide open. It was a door. Not a welcome mat. And I was okay with that. It's been 2 years. The building looks different now. Not because we changed much physically, though the signage is cleaner, the office is more functional, but because the energy shifted, it doesn't feel heavy anymore. It doesn't feel like a relic trying to preserve its past. It feels like a business again. A good one. We're profitable. Not flashy, but steady. Clients trust us. Staff stay. Vendors reach out to us first now, not the other way around. We've streamlined our operations, rebuilt from the inside, and grown without compromising what made the company worth saving in the first place. And we did it without a single press release. No headlines. No grand announcement. Just the work. That was always the point. The family doesn't talk about it. Not to me, at least. My mother sends the occasional holiday card. Grant moved out of state, some advisory role at a startup trying to sell warehouse robotics. My father, as far as I know, still plays golf with the same 4 men who used to sit on his board. I assume they all know. But no one says it. And I don't need them to. Their silence is its own confession. I used to think justice meant confrontation. That it looked like slamming doors, mic drops, people finally admitting they were wrong. But now I know better. Sometimes, justice is quiet. It's not yelling at the people who underestimated you. It's walking into a building they told you you'd never be part of, holding the keys. There's a moment every morning when I unlock my office and flip on the lights, where I remember what it used to feel like, sitting at the kids' table, waiting for approval that never came. And now? Now I don't wait. I don't ask for invitations. I lead. The legacy they built, what they thought they were preserving by keeping me out, was never the real inheritance. It was the version I rebuilt. The company I kept alive. The one I reshaped without dragging their names through the mud or demanding applause. There's a plaque outside the front conference room. It used to have my grandfather's name on it, commemorating the founding of Sherman Global in 1974. I didn't take it down. I just added a second one beneath it. Rebuilt in 2023. Leaner. Faster. Better. No name attached. Just facts. Because legacy isn't about who started it. It's about who kept it going when it almost fell apart. I still keep my original company running too. The e-commerce side. The one they dismissed as a phase. It's fully automated now, staffed by a small but brilliant team that handles everything from procurement to customer service. That business taught me how to scale, how to listen, how to operate without external validation. It taught me that the best kind of credibility doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you build. A few months ago, I was speaking on a panel, something I don't do often, but this one was for a nonprofit I support. The topic was quiet leadership. I almost turned it down, but the woman who invited me said something that stuck. She said, people need to see that it's possible to lead without shouting. That being underestimated isn't a barrier, it's a head start. So I said yes. And halfway through the panel, someone asked, what would you say to someone who feels unseen in their career? Who's doing the work but getting none of the credit? I answered without thinking. Let your results speak. If they're ignoring you now, keep building until ignoring you is no longer an option. Don't fight for recognition, fight for competence. That's what lasts. A few people nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. After the panel, someone came up to me and said, you must have had amazing mentors to learn all that. I smiled. I had the opposite. And, honestly, that was the truth. I learned what not to do from watching it done the old way, loudly, rigidly, fearfully. I learned how not to lead from the ones who refused to hand me a seat until I bought the whole table. No hard feelings. Just facts. People sometimes ask if I ever regret not fighting harder to stay part of the original family business, before the acquisition, before the shift. I don't. Because the truth is, I never left it. They just didn't recognize the version of me that showed up. Now, they don't have a choice. We send quarterly updates to shareholders. Every time the email goes out, I see my father's name on the list. I don't know if he reads them. I don't really care. But sometimes I think about the first time he said, still selling stuff online? It used to echo in my head. Sharp, dismissive, rooted in everything he didn't understand about the world I was building. Now I think about it when I sign vendor contracts. When I approve budgets. When I look at our numbers and see a double-digit growth curve that didn't come from luck, it came from discipline. I think about it when I walk past the office he used to occupy. It's a conference room now. No plaque, no desk, no ghost of authority. Just clean walls, fresh paint, open space. And I think, yeah, still selling stuff online. And now you work for me. But I don't say it. Because the win isn't the line. The win is the silence that follows. That's what I've learned. You don't have to prove your worth to people who never intended to see it. You just have to keep going. Keep building. And when they finally look up, make sure it's to you signing their checks. Thanks for listening. Have you ever had to walk away from people who didn't respect your value, only to succeed without them? Did you ever get the chance to take your power back quietly? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this hit home for you, like, share, and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries, leveling up, and letting results speak louder than revenge.